You know, when the cinema was first introduced in India, and I heard a story once of a village where they were screening a film in the village hall, and in the film there was a tiger running down the road, and everyone in the cinema ran out. So then the cinema, it was the first screening of a film in the village. They had never seen a film before. So then the manager of the village hall had to come out and explain to everyone that there was no tiger there. They weren't in danger. There wasn't a tiger running towards them. And then they came back in again, and he replayed the film, and then they watched the same act again, and everybody sat there enjoying it, chatting and laughing and looking at the tiger running towards them. And so in the first incident, in the first case, the first viewing, the image of the tiger was concealing. It had a concealing power. It concealed its reality, the screen. If you go up to the tiger, all that's there is a screen. It wasn't a real tiger there. The reality, relatively speaking, of the tiger was the screen. But the tiger veiled. Although the tiger was only made of the screen, there was nothing there apart from the screen, the image of the tiger had the ability to veil its reality. In fact, it was the screen itself, I'm stretching the analogy a bit now, the screen itself had assumed the form of the tiger, and in that form had concealed itself. And then the second time the villagers came back, the image of the tiger had lost its capacity to veil its reality. And so instead of concealing the screen, the tiger shone with the screen. All that was there was the screen. So it's the same. The screen is consciousness. Experience is the activity of consciousness. All thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving is the activity of consciousness. So it is consciousness itself that assumes the form or the activity of experience, thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving, and thereby conceals itself. It conceals itself, with its own activity. That's Maya. But at a certain point, when we explore experience very deeply, as we do here, and we discover that all there is to experience is the knowing of it. The only substance present in experience is knowing. And at that stage, experience loses its capacity to veil its reality, consciousness, and instead shines with it. Experience becomes a revealing power instead of a concealing power. You investigate your true nature, you go to your true nature, to yourself. You discover the nature of yourself, that it is eternal, infinite, inherently peaceful, unconditionally fulfilled. That's the culmination of the self-inquiry process. And then you begin to allow that knowledge of yourself to permeate all realms of your experience. That is transfiguration. The allowing of this new understanding of yourself to infiltrate and permeate all your experience until your experience becomes outshined or outshone by the light of yourself. You imply that it is possible, but it's very, very difficult and therefore requires tremendous effort. No, our self is unnatural condition. The separate self, that is the belief that I'm temporary and finite, that is what requires effort. That is what requires maintenance. It's not that it's possible to be yourself. Your being yourself is the only experience there is, the only experience there is that is truly effortless. Because it is your natural state being a separate self or imagining, believing and feeling that you are a separate self is an acquired state. It is not your natural state. And being acquired, it requires constant effort and maintenance. But we are so accustomed to making this effort that we no longer realize we are making it. And we feel that it is our default natural state. And therefore, from the perspective of the separate self, it seems that returning to ourself or living established in ourself is something that requires effort. When you speak of the need to reground yourself, you imply that you're sort of coming back to reality, so to speak.
Yes.
And by implication that where you had been prior to that was some lofty, abstract, metaphysical, albeit very pleasurable state, and that you had to come back from that in order to be real again. So that is not really the intention. What the purpose, if we can speak of a purpose, the purpose of this morning's contemplation was not to take us away from reality towards some marvelous abstract state, but to take us to reality, to take us to the heart of our experience. When we go to the heart of our experience, as we did this morning, that is not in any way in conflict with or in opposition to the demands of everyday life. It is entirely compatible with the demands of everyday life. In fact, what is incompatible with the demands of everyday life is the belief and the feeling that I am a temporary, finite, separate self. That is really incompatible with a fully functional, enjoyable life. So I understand, of course, that by contrast with the way you normally experience things, this morning's meditation may have taken you to an abnormal experience. But I recommend that you simply visit that so-called abnormal experience, which I consider just to be reality, more and more, and acclimatize to it, so that it becomes your new norm, and that you don't require a very controlled environment. For instance, our meditation this morning, which is a very controlled environment. Many of us touch or recognize this reality in such an environment, but in time we want to be able to remain in touch with this reality when we're having lunch with our friends and walking in nature and going to work and spending time with our families, and it wants to become our new natural way of being in the world. So I don't recommend that you try to reground yourself in the sense of coming back to our old sense of reality. No, I recommend that you acclimatize to this new sense of reality. What is this new sense of reality? That all there is a single, infinite, indivisible whole, made out of pure consciousness or pure knowing. And to not only to understand this, but to feel this. And not only to feel this, but to act in the world and to relate with others in a way that is consistent with this feeling understanding. And that may take some time to acclimatize to this new understanding. But no, I don't recommend you ground yourself, if by that you mean going back to the old way of thinking and feeling. But these retreats are, in a way, they are retreats to the extent that they they take us out of our normal circumstances, away from all the demands of our everyday life. So they are a kind of controlled environment in which we can both explore these matters and begin to live them on a day-by-day, on a daily basis, so that when we go back out into our everyday life, we take this understanding with us.
So I want to make certain that I understand. So that experience that I had, to explore it and stay with it and not try to hurry up and bring myself back into the separate self?
Yes. So, for instance, this morning, what you might have done, you described that when the meditation came to an end, you wanted to keep your eyes closed and stay there forever.
Yes.
So, what you might have done then, in fact, very often at the end of these meditations, I suggest that we just have a brief period of silence between the meditation and entering the dining hall, which is just to make a kind of transitional period to ease into our activities and relationships. But you could, for instance, have remained sitting down, but you could have opened your eyes. So that would be just adding one new layer of perception. You're not yet eating and talking and walking, but you've just added, you remain with your experience, but you just add one new objective experience, in this case seeing. And you'd stay there for 5 minutes until this, making sure that your experience remained, that the fact of seeing didn't bring your experience to an end. You continued experiencing what you were experiencing, but now in the presence of seeing, rather than with your eyes closed. And then when you felt that even in the midst of seeing, you were still having this same experience, then you could think, okay, I'm now going to get up, and without saying anything, I'm going to walk to the dining room, maintaining your experience, and to see that actually even in the presence of seeing and walking, the recognition that you had come to remains, and then you add eating, and then you add talking, and then you add the various elements of objective experience until what you had experienced during the meditation with your eyes closed is still present in the midst of everyday experience.
Okay, that makes sense. See, I was experiencing like it had to be either or.
No, it's not. It's not. Absolutely not.
Okay.
It's not either or. But at the same time, it might, and it does, require, there is a kind of transitional period where the old way of thinking, feeling, acting, relating and perceiving is infused with our new understanding, and is gradually colonized by our new understanding. And that takes time. And when I say time, I don't mean it takes 5 minutes from walking from here to the dining room. It takes maybe a few years for this new understanding to really percolate through all the layers of our experience.
Okay, that makes sense. I understand that. Thank you very much.
So my relationship to thought, it can be much the same to my relationship with the world.
Yes.
Yeah. In that I can't control what happens in the world, and I really can't control what thoughts come in. I think that there's a tendency to kind of identify my quality of being by the thoughts that arise.
No. Identify the quality of being just by the quality of being. The screen doesn't derive its qualities from the image. Your relationship to thoughts and perceptions is the same as the relationship between a screen and an image. In other words, the screen is intimately one with the image. It's closer than close to the image, but at the same time it is completely independent of it. That is you. You, this experience of being aware, are totally intimate with all your experience. Every experience you have, that is every so-called inside feeling, but also every so-called outside perception, are this close to you. Totally intimate. Not even intimate, because there are not two things there to begin with. There isn't a screen and an image. Yeah, it's just you, just knowing. So in that sense, you are intimate with all experience, equally intimate, not more intimate with this than you are with this. Equally intimate with all experience. And at the same time, you, the experience of simply being aware, are absolutely independent of all experience. So it's this mixture of total intimacy and total freedom. As we understand ourselves, so we see the world. If we think, in other words, I am a temporary finite self that shares the limits of the body, if we think I am a temporary finite object, then our experience will appear in conformity with that belief. In other words, your experience will be a multiplicity and diversity of finite objects. You will feel that you are separate from everyone and everything, related to them through an act of knowing, feeling, or perceiving. I know such and such. I love you. I see the tree. These are the three channels: knowing, feeling, and perceiving, through which the inside self, the subject, the apparent subject, is connected to the outside object, other, or world. But if you believe that you are a temporary finite subject made out of mind living in the body. But if you know that you are simply this unqualified experience of being aware, then you find yourself equally pervading all experience. You cannot say, I am closer to my thoughts than I am to the sound of that car. Thoughts are made out of thinking. The sound of the car is made out of hearing. Both appear equally in me. And when I try to touch the stuff that they are made of, all I find is this empty knowing.
That's true. So,
But
no, really, Rupert, I understand, and I know I have that experience. So, but I have thoughts that are in direct contradiction to that, even
yes,
in the midst
yeah.
of that experience.
So you have to recondition your mind as well as your body. That is part of what we do here. It's one thing to understand that, and you obviously understand it. But just understanding it is not enough. Because your mind and your body have been laboring for decades under the serving for decades the demands and the fears and the neuroses of an illusory finite self. So just the recognition of your true nature is not enough to put an end to those habits. They come back with a vengeance, very often stronger than they were before, because the separate self feels, quite rightly, that it is threatened, its existence is threatened by our new understanding. It is threatened. Its days are numbered. And it's going to do everything it can to prevent itself disappearing. So this a tidal wave of thoughts and, more importantly, feelings are going to come back and assail you and try to persuade you of the validity of the separate self. So much of what we do here is not just about the recognition of our true nature. It is about the realignment of our thoughts, feelings, activities, relationships, and perceptions with that understanding. So when these thoughts keep coming back, you have to be firm with them. when a thought appears on behalf of the separate self, before doing what the thought wants you to do, the thought's going to take you off down a journey of activity or relationship or whatever it is. Before doing what the thought tells you to do, question the self on whose behalf that thought is rising. Who are you representing? Ask the thought, on whose behalf do you come to me? And if it is a thought that is based on being a temporary, finite self, then instead of following the thought, question the validity of the self on whose behalf that thought is arising. And be relentless about that. Every thought that rises on behalf of a finite self, question it, rather than doing what the thought wants you to do. And eventually, you will erode this old habit of the mind, rising on behalf of an illusory self. And the mind more and more will begin to rise on behalf of the qualities of the true and only self of pure awareness. Your thoughts, you won't stop having thoughts, but your thoughts will be an expression of what you truly are, not what you previously imagined yourself to be. So it is not a getting rid of thoughts, it's a liberation of our thoughts and indeed our feelings and perceptions from the tyranny of a non-existent, finite self.
So do you ever have thoughts that you just have to say no to?
Yes, occasionally an old thought arises in me based on an old habit of believing myself to be a finite self, and I do exactly what I've just suggested to you. What happens after one has, to begin with, when a thought rises on behalf of a finite self, it takes us maybe 20 minutes to walk ourselves, to question the I around whom that thought revolves. And we may have to take some time, slowly walking ourselves back to find the true I of simply aware being. And that may take some time. We do it the first time, it may take 20 minutes. And then the second time, 15 minutes. And then the third time, 10 minutes. And as we become more practiced at this, we find shortcuts. We don't have to go every single step, plod, 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 because we've done it before. We can go quicker. We find shortcuts. And in the end, we find when that thought arises on behalf of the finite self, it doesn't really require time anymore to walk ourselves back. It's just like an instant recognition, and it falls.
Because there's often, a great physical resistance along with the thought, or a physical, there's a whole physical thing along with the thought.
Yes, yes. But we'll spend a lot of time this week exploring just that, because the separate self, the apparently temporary, finite consciousness that is the separate self, is not just concealed in our thoughts as beliefs. More importantly, it is concealed in our body as feelings. And that, in fact, is the deeper root of the separate self. And in fact, long after the separate self has been flushed out of our beliefs, it remains present, hiding in our feelings. And in this approach, we spend a lot of time, as you know, exploring this deeper root of the sense of separation. First of all, exposing the sense of me in the body, gradually encouraging it to come up out of its hiding places, and then gradually allowing it to dissolve. See what happens to your mind when there are no questions. Where does it go? Be aware of the mind's expectation to hear some marvelous non-dual teaching that is finally going to make everything okay. But then, when there is no non-dual teaching, when there are no questions and no answers, what does the mind do with this residual expectation? Does it just go towards another object, another fantasy? Where does it go? Does boredom begin to set in after a few minutes? Boredom is just the other side of expectation. I need an object to make me happy. I need some marvelous non-dual words to finally make everything okay. But when they don't come, where does the mind go for relief from its boredom? Does it just go towards the next daydream, the next fantasy? It's been going there for years. It doesn't work. If objective experience was able to produce happiness, surely we would have found the ultimate objective experience by now.